Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, October the 29th. Just a couple of days away from Halloween, I guess in exactly a week, people will be voting in the country. I am really amazed by the number of people who've already voted. Something like 30 to 40 million people. So if you just think about that, that's like what? Half of the country? Not quite half in this campaign because it'll be like 150 million people. But that's like what, 30%? That's a lot. That's a lot of people. If nothing else, the voting lines on next Tuesday will not be as long as they normally are. Here in Texas, I already voted. I voted a week ago, and you can still vote this week. So if you're planning to vote in Texas, get out this week because you can do it this week. And don't wait till Friday because Friday the lines are going to be really long. I mean, they're going to be very, very long. Anyway, I've got a post over at the American Thinker. Just want to bring to your attention. I'm writing about these differences between men and women. I mean, we're going through a very interesting time in the country's history. I don't think men and women have ever been as far apart politically as they are right now. The so-called gender gap, the big one, big gender gap. You know, women obviously favor Kamala Harris, and men obviously favor Donald Trump. Now, I guess the bottom line is which one of these two gender gaps has a bigger gap, meaning are more, is the difference the number plus 15 for Trump and men or women plus whatever? Which one of these is going to be a factor? I think it's hard to tell at the moment. It's hard to tell at the moment, but what I think is most interesting is the political differences among young people. People between 18 and 29. That's a group where political differences are pretty big. I mean, they took a poll. They asked young men 18 to 29, what's the big issue? They go national security, the economy. They took a similar poll to young women. What's the big issue? Abortion. Okay. But here's the tragedy. There's nothing that the president of the United States can do about abortion. I mean, this is the tragedy to me. We're making a big deal about abortion in this campaign. What is the president of the United States going to do about abortion? Absolutely nothing. What is a senator going to do about abortion? Nothing. So whether you're voting for somebody for the Senate or for the House or for president based on abortion, I think you're wasting your vote. Now, in a perfect world, I guess, if a Senate were to approve an abortion law, whatever it is, and they send it to the president, maybe the president would sign it, but it would be challenged immediately in the states. It would be challenged immediately in the courts. I guarantee you Texas would challenge it immediately, and something like 25 states, maybe 30 states would challenge it. So, look, if you want to change abortion, if you want to make abortion more accessible wherever you live, concentrate on the elections wherever you live, because that's really the only place where you're going to be able to do anything about abortion. And abortion is one of the big differences between young men and young women in the country right now. Interesting. So check out my post over at the American Thinker. I've got a post coming out tomorrow about Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of Amazon, I guess. I still think he is the owner of Amazon. I don't think he has sold that interest. And of course, he bought the Washington Post. And you may remember the Washington Post decided that they were not going to endorse anybody this year for president, which was a bit of a shock, I think, because most people expected the Washington Post to do what they usually do, which is endorse the Democrat candidate. But this year, they're not endorsing anybody. The LA Times, the same way. There's a few other newspapers. Minnesota Star Tribune is not endorsing anybody either. And that's a very liberal newspaper up in Minnesota. So a lot of people are saying, gee, that's bad news for Kamala Harris. She's not getting these endorsements. But I think what Jeff Bezos said is more important than the endorsements themselves. I don't believe, at least for me personally, I have never voted for anybody because of an endorsement. I usually try to do my own research and look at the candidates as much as I can. But I've never voted for somebody because, let's say, the Dallas Morning News said, vote for this person or that person. Never really voted that way. But nevertheless, Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, I think the remarks that he made are more important than whether or not the newspaper is going to be endorsing candidates. He said pretty much what I just said, that I don't think somebody in Pennsylvania or Arizona is going to change their vote because the Washington Post is endorsing one candidate or the other. And I think that's true. I think that's true. I think these endorsements maybe have a value in local elections, but beyond that, I don't think they do. But I think the larger point that Jeff Bezos was making about the state of the media, that's where I think he's right on target. He says, look, the media has a credibility problem. People don't believe the media. They think the media is biased. I think he's ordering the Washington Post to hire more conservative journalists, I guess, or writers. I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea. The Washington Post, like any other newspaper, should not be, one side or the other. Now, the editorial page is different, but the coverage of the news should be as balanced as it can be. And the Washington Post, in the minds of many people, has a liberal focus or bias. I guess that's the right word. I mean, the New York Times is the same way. So I think Jeff Bezos is onto something here when he's telling people in the industry, look, people, we're losing the public. We're losing the people who buy the newspapers or create the subscriptions or watch the news. I mean, you've seen this boom of alternative media. It's remarkable. The number of things, like the number of places that I go to on a daily basis to get media. Now, I have 2 or 3 favorites, actually. Hugh Hewitt is a favorite of mine. He's very good. Bill O'Reilly has a great podcast. And then there's a bunch of others that I check, not every day, but that I check from time to time, usually bits and pieces here and there, because after all, you can't spend your whole day just checking podcasts. But there has been a boom in many of these podcasts, alternative newscasts, alternative sources of information, that obviously all of this is coming at the expense of the traditional media. Now, I think the local media, meaning the channels who do local news, I think they're okay. My experience from what I read, the local channels, who cover the weather and the local stories, those seem to be doing okay. They seem to have more credibility with the public. And a lot of that has to do with the coverage. The local news is not as political as, let's say, the national news. But the local news seems to be doing okay. So the guys who work in the local news, they're fine. They should be doing okay. But it's the national news where I think they're taking a hit on viewers and on advertising, I assume. Obviously, the industry's changing. Newspapers are not read as much as they used to be. That's true, too. That's a fact. You cannot get around that. I'm the only person in my street who still gets a newspaper. And why do I know that? Because 10 years ago, I would go out at 6:30 in the morning to get my paper, and I could see a bunch of papers, down the sidewalk. There aren't any anymore. I mean, the fellow who drops our paper comes by, he throws it at our house, and he keeps on driving. He didn't do that before. He was hitting a lot of houses. So a lot of my neighbors have actually canceled their Dallas Morning News subscriptions. I still have it because actually I enjoy the paper, not necessarily the Dallas Morning News, but I mean, I enjoy the idea of holding something while I'm reading the news. I also like the sports page because that is, something I check every day, obviously. And I like to devour the sports page, look at the box scores and look at a lot of the numbers and so on. And sometimes that's hard to do on the internet. So I kind of like the newspaper to hold it, the sports page. It's one of the first things I do every morning is go to the sports page and look at all the different stories. So that I still do. And that's the main reason why I still get the paper. But nevertheless, there's been a decline in the people who read and follow the traditional news. And I think that should be a shock to anybody who gets a paycheck from a traditional news organization. And that's what Jeff Bezos was saying in the comments that he made, responding to people criticizing him for not endorsing one presidential candidate or the other. Now, I'm not sure how much of those endorsements contribute to the bias. That part I cannot tell you. But I do think the coverage of the news in certain newspapers is very biased. And I think that if many of these news organizations would look for a little bit more political diversity in their newsrooms, I think that they would do quite well. They would do well. I think the customers would be happy. A couple of other quick things here. President Trump had a press conference today. I saw like 10 minutes of it, and it seemed like he was introducing a lot of people with issues related to the border, some mothers who were talking about their kids or their daughters who were killed. And then there was another mother from I guess the mother of a Marine who was killed in Afghanistan. And look, I like what President Trump is doing, focusing on the big issues and moving on, because those are the issues that are going to determine the election, or the big stories: the economy, immigration, foreign policy, that's energy. That's where we need to be concentrated. And let me just tell you this about this Puerto Rican joke. Look, I have never voted one way or the other based on a comic or, I don't know, a movie star or stuff like that. I mean, when I hear that a movie star, let's say, votes the same way I do, I say, great. But when I hear that they don't, I say, okay, go your own way. No big deal. They don't have any influence on me. So on Sunday, as you probably know by now, there was a joke at this Trump rally, and the joke was about Puerto Ricans, and the joke was nasty. I'm not going to deny it. But the guy who was telling the joke has a history of some nasty jokes. I mean, I've seen some clips of him now. I didn't know anything about him before the rally, but now that he's become famous, I've seen a couple of clips. I mean, they had a roast for Tom Brady, the quarterback, and the things that this guy said about everybody were pretty incredible. But that's just his style. That's what he does. I mean, I don't necessarily have to like it. As I said, I didn't know who this guy was before this thing became controversial. I just don't think it's going to have much of an impact. I really don't. I just don't think people are going to get all worked up about a joke. Now, if you're a Puerto Rican and you say to me, well, I'm no longer going to vote for Trump because of that joke, I have to really wonder how committed you were to Trump in the first place. I just have to ask that question. How committed were you in the first place? I don't think you were very committed. If you're going to change your point of view over a joke, I mean, come on. Over a joke, you're going to change who you vote for president, particularly a joke that didn't even come from your candidate. I mean, if Trump had said that, it's a different story, or Pence, or Vance, or Elon Musk, or Bobby Kennedy, or some of the heavyweights who were there. But this came from a guy who was doing, I guess he was filling in some space earlier in the day. So I just don't think it's going to have much of an impact. I really don't, if any. But of course, unfortunately, it gets a lot of publicity because it is, after all, Trump, and anything that has to do with Trump becomes a headline story. It's amazing. I don't know why, but every time something happens with Trump, it becomes a headline story. So I don't think it'll have much of an impact, this joke, but hopefully in the next day or so, we can move on to bigger issues. Thank you for watching. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.